where you can play as a group or just in a pair. Rounds last around 45 minutes, and there's 900 questions to get through across categories like the 90s Premier League, the Three Lions, and the World Cup, to name just a few. Pundit are offering TSP listeners 20% off their purchase when they use the code SAINTS. Just head to punditgames.co.uk and you'll be able to enter the code as you check out. You'll also find a link to the website and the code in the YouTube and the podcast description. Coming up this week on the pod, Saints complete a league double over Chelsea for the first time since 1988. Going to look back at Saturday's win on the road. We head to Leeds in search of successive wins next. Going to preview that task. And have we found the man to lead the Great Escape? The latest on the manager vacancy also coming up. My name's Martin Starke, and I'm joined this week by Steve Grant, who's the owner of SaintsWeb. Glen de la Cour is the writer of the blog League 1-10, and Jacob Tanswell is the Southampton reporter for The Athletic. All underpinned by our TSP patrons. This is episode 222 of the Total Saints podcast. Now, a win, a clean sheet, a manager speaking sense in a press conference. There's literally nothing to moan about this week. I think we can just crack on and talk about the football for the first time in ages. And what a great result it was as well. Saints picking up all 3 points at Stamford Bridge. Glenn, I'm going to start with you. It seemed very much to me yesterday about a case of getting back to what we used to do well. It was good to see.
Yeah, it was right from the way the team set up on the pitch at the start of the game. It was basically 4-4-2, wasn't it, with everybody pressing relatively high to try and make it uncomfortable for Chelsea. And it was like the good days of Ralph all over again. That first half was really good. We forced them into mistakes, didn't really give them many opportunities at all. They were really a team that was a collection of individuals. They didn't really play, as a team. Very expensive individuals, as we said last week, but they didn't really have the patterns of play. And it wasn't until half time when they brought Sterling on that they sort of did anything really to worry us. But I thought we played really well. The first half, I was really impressed with Tall Paul up front. The amount of work he did bringing others into play, controlling the long balls forward with his chest and just holding people off. Thought he was excellent, and we were a threat, and obviously getting the goal before half time is just standard, barely worth talking about, isn't it now? It was good to see Stuart Armstrong back in the team. I thought, just to add a little bit of quality that has been lacking with our forward play, and the two new lads. It was great. So it was a really enjoyable first half. Obviously 1-0 up. The only thing that made me slightly nervous was I thought the substitutions possibly came a little bit early. We were obviously playing for 1-0 from the moment we took off our three sort of most forward players. That kind of worried me a bit, but the end justified the means at the end of the day, and we got to the end and won the game. And it's always lovely to win games against the Super League clubs. And Chelsea Twitter was just glorious after the game, as usual.
It still is today as well.
Oh, how can we not win against bottom of the table, no manager Southampton? It's just glorious.
Well, it's not an unreasonable question from their perspective, to be fair.
600 million is obviously not enough to spend on a collection of individuals. But they've all got 10-year contracts, so they can I'm sure they'll get a good performance out of them by the time that's finished. So,
time for them to gel.
No, it's great. It was a good performance. We played well in the first half, got in front, and managed the game well in the second half, despite some strange refereeing from David Cour, who's not one of my favourite referees. He always strikes me as one of the weak ones that you don't really want when you're playing against the big sides. But I guess he could have sent Sekou Mara off if he wanted to. If he was being that way inclined, but I think that was kind of evened up. I think by the challenge by Koulibaly in the first minute. I mean, to stamp on Tall Paul's thigh, how high off the ground you have to be to stamp halfway up the leg of a 6'7" striker. I didn't thought that challenge was diabolical. But no, happy days, won the game, and we've got to get something next week now.
And Steve, we were hoping for a good performance, and we got it yesterday. Some would say it's because you're back in the UK now. A win for Sutton, a win for Southampton. That's what was missing. But what did you make of it all yesterday?
Yeah, it was good. We were, I think, ultimately, I think what we as fans want just is something that you can kind of identify with. And as you say, that was kind of back to what we were doing in the sort of good periods under Ralph, in that we were pressing at the right times. We weren't going just full pelt and being really sort of rash about it. We were picking our moments to put pressure on them. And I think that kind of uncertainty puts defenders sort of in a sort of more sort of uneasy situation than if they know that they're always going to be getting pressed. If they don't know when the guy's going to be right on their shoulder, actually it's probably harder for them to make a call as to whether they try and play it clever or just get rid. And we saw with that early chance where we end up in on the right wing, and Kepa Arrizabalaga has to make a pretty good save. Actually, I think that save was underrated. I thought there wasn't an awful lot made of it. It's like, oh, Kepa's made a save. It's like, actually, that's a really good save.
Yeah.
Because he's literally only just caught his elbow, and that's kind of taken it away. And I mean, it's one of those. I guess you maybe think, well, if we score that early, then maybe we've scored too early. In a game like that, where you're expected to give up the bulk of the possession. Although weirdly, in the first half, we didn't. We had, I saw we had like 60% possession first half.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't know whether that reflects especially well on us or especially badly on Chelsea. Perhaps somewhere in the middle.
But, yeah, maybe a bit of both.
But no, I mean, first half especially, we were excellent. Causing problems, created chances, didn't really give them a sniff, apart from, I think Azpilicueta's one that he hit into the side netting. But I mean, you'd be fuming if you let that goal in. As I look towards the Everton Leeds winner for a prime example. And yeah, second half we dug in, and I mean, let's be very blunt about it. We kind of got away with it a little bit with 2 clearances off the line it was just right man in the right place at the right time. And probably 7 days ago, well, I mean, we saw with Bednarek 7 days ago, that shot cannons between your heels, off your inner calf, and then dribbles over the line. So I mean, Nathan Jones obviously wouldn't have been watching because he was turning out in the Dorset First Division. But if he'd seen that, he'd have just rolled his eyes and said, "Well, how's your luck, lads?" But no, we weathered the storm, and it kind of, I mean, even though 12 minutes went up for the Azpilicueta injury, I kind of it wasn't as if it was the Alamo or anything like that. There were crosses into the box, sure, but they were all manageable. And that's kind of one of the things that Bednarek does tend to do quite well. If you put the ball into his head, he will just deal with it. And I mean, at the end of the day, they don't have a centre forward, so there wasn't really anybody that you had to kind of designate and say, right, we've got to make sure this guy is the one we keep quiet, because they've just got about 27 number 10s who you can kind of draw them out of a tombola before kickoff and hope that something sticks. I mean, as Glen said, Sterling came on at half time and was by far their best player. Everything in the first half was a little bit pedestrian. They couldn't get through any gaps. We shut the game down really well. Second half, obviously we tired, and Havertz and Sterling seem to have a relatively decent understanding between each other and worked a few little openings. But other than those 2 that were cleared off the line, and I suppose Gallagher's relatively late one as well, not a huge amount to alarm us really, which kind of bodes well going forwards. I mean, you got to obviously look at the fact that Chelsea have scored only a goal a game this season, which is a pretty mad stat in itself. But no, I mean, another clean sheet builds confidence, which is something that certainly can't be said for the Leeds dressing room at the moment when we head there next week. So yeah, all in all, pretty good 7 days, I'd say.
Plenty of positives. Jacob, it seemed to me a return to a system that the players were perhaps comfortable with or more comfortable with yesterday. But the difference being since they last played that system, maybe some better players coming in.
Yeah, but also that probably makes it a little bit more difficult because they're not attuned to the pressing triggers and the nuance. And I think it was quite telling that Elyounoussi and Stuart Armstrong played in number 10 positions, because although Elyounoussi gets maligned, nearly all the time
on this podcast,
yeah, exactly. Whenever he starts, I think what they like about him is that he does understand the role in terms of where he's got to be in and out of possession. Although Azpilicueta did have some joy in the first half down his side. We've only got to think from last week. It was, and even the week before post Brentford, it was an absolute disaster inside Stamford Bridge. There was issues. Coaches were getting marginalised. Rubén Sellés had basically no say in that final week because Nathan Jones said he wanted to compromise, and in his way of compromising, he would only listen to the two coaches that he brought in from Luton, and no one really knew what they were doing. And one player said during the game against Wolves is that they basically stopped listening to Nathan Jones and they tried to do it their own way in the first half, and I think they actually had a bit of success in the first half doing it their own way.
We were quite good first half, weren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if the players naturally want to be on the front foot, because they want to keep the ball as far away as their goal as possible, because that's when sometimes they get a bit shaky, and they're used to it. They've had 3 or 4 years of Ralph, and although things would go downhill quite a lot of the time, they do feel that's probably their best way of winning games, because they are quite athletic, they are strong, they can fight as long as they've got a right manager backing them to the hilt. And in Rubén Sellés, they loved him, and I think they closed the game off against Wolves on Monday. They spoke about it. They basically cleared the air. Rubén Sellés told a few home truths in terms of, some of you players aren't going to play again for me. We've got a huge squad. I'm going to now start nailing down my team, my substitutions. And then from there on in, they started working on the B team, on the principles of play. And I think it was telling that Dave Horseman came in because he plays the 4-2-2-2 more better than anyone else, and he sticks to the playbook. So I think those principles are really key, and they look fantastic. I thought the coaching dynamic on the sidelines, Carl Martin, extremely highly rated, but he's not really done much under Nathan Jones, and he was at the forefront, wasn't he, celebrating Rubén Sellés. So yeah, I think
you were pretty much sat behind them yesterday, weren't you?
Yeah,
you sat behind the bench. So how, what was that dynamic like during the game? Was there a lot of correspondence going on, a lot of chatting and sharing ideas?
Yeah,
so the pictures we saw, they seem to be having the time of their lives.
They've also had a little monitor in front of him, so Rubén would turn around and just look and see if there's anything they noticed. But yeah, like you said, Martin, I kept looking at Sellés and he just kept smiling and shaking his head. I think after Ward-Prowse scored, he just looked at Carl Martin and was like, what's going on? Like, this is really, really good. And it just looked like he looked like a manager. Actually, it looked like a manager, didn't it? He didn't look like he was pretending or putting on this false show. He looked like everything came natural, and you saw that through the way he dressed. I'm sure we'll come on to him, but I was just really impressed by them because none of them looked out of their depth. They looked like they all wanted it, and they all put in the same direction. And I don't think that could be said under Jones, especially in that final week.
We'll get into Rubén Sellés definitely a bit later on. We'll also want to talk about the clean sheet and the back four and defensively how we set up. But I'm just going to ask the three of you about James Ward-Prowse first of all. And I'm going to start with you, Glen, because to get that free kick down into the bottom corner was special. Someone said to me, "Oh, it's like a penalty," but actually, I would argue that he's better at the free kicks than he is at penalties. I get more nervous when he's taking a penalty than I do when he's got a free kick on the outside of the box.
Yeah, I mean, what was that particular free kick he scored yesterday? It's a slight variation on what he's done a few times, where he kind of whips it into the top corner. So this one went up and went down, and that seemed to be what did the goalkeeper. I think the goalkeeper knew roughly where it was going, but he couldn't get himself over and down quick enough to get anywhere near it, really. So because we've seen Ward-Prowse at times whip it into the top corner, and that was kind of the standard, and that was all he had, really. I'm not belittling it in any way, but that was his standard free kick, was to
not
whip
a bad
it
thing to have, is it?
No, absolutely, but to whip it into that top corner. And then we had the Wolves one last year, where he just smashed it and it went the other side.
Frustration, wasn't it?
And it's like that. This is ridiculous. He had one at Brighton that he kind of placed, and it bounced into the bottom corner, and now he's got this one as well. So it's people are noticing the technique now, and just that everyone was highlighting how much that one dipped and how that basically made it impossible for the goalkeeper to get anywhere near it. So, and what he said in his interview afterwards, he said, it's nice to know that if you practice something enough, you can really become sort of like the master of it. And that's what it is. I mean, he will break Beckham's record, hopefully next week.
Hopefully in a Saints shirt.
Yeah. Hopefully a couple will go in next week, and we can get some points against Leeds. But
the first thing I thought about when it went in yesterday, Glenn, was your observation last week about when he decided not to shoot against Wolves, and that to me, I was just like, the more I think about that, and I probably need to let it go. Like, what on earth was all that about? Because he could have broken the record yesterday.
It was very strange to get 2 free kicks against Wolves, especially the one in the last minute, and basically not shoot. And they were sort of 20, 21 yards out. It was very strange, but I guess we'll never know until he writes a book after he's retired.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, we've been pretty critical of him up until the World Cup break, but post-break, with everything else that's been going on, he's been that consistency and our standout player that we need. Yeah,
definitely. I think to be honest, that rejection from the World Cup squad, and deserved as it was, I think that rejection has spurred him on, and he's come back from that from the mid-season break. More motivated to raise his game and put in the sort of consistent performances we were seeing in previous years. He'd let it slip for 2 or 3 months, and unfortunately, when you play in a position where you're kind of never likely to be a regular starter in that England team, I think with the system that they play, you've kind of got to be on form more often than not. And having that long period of time, just right before the World Cup, where obviously recency bias is going to be key, and if you're clearly not in form, then you're much less likely to be picked, especially if you're on the fringes of things anyway. So I think actually that has helped him, and it's helped us, because I think if he goes to the World Cup, having put in the performances he did sort of September to the start of November, then I wonder if there might then sort of be an underlying complacency of like, well, I still got in the World Cup squad even with those performances. But no, fair play. He's done what we needed him to do, and that was to kind of lift himself out of that little funk. And yeah, I mean, ultimately he is going to be one of the key players, if not the sole key player, in terms of whether we stay up this year.
It was a real leader's performance for me yesterday, Jacob, and he's had a lot on his shoulders recently. And I guess with the managerial changes, the dressing room are going to be looking to the captain more than ever.
Yeah, they always seem to look at him, don't they? I think everyone's running out of words to describe James Ward-Prowse. Even the managers, like Nathan Jones was highly complimentary of him. Rubén Sellés, probably more so. Even more effusive yesterday. He called him the best free kick taker the Premier League's ever seen. I think everyone probably agree with that now, and he'll probably be vindicated in the next couple of weeks when he breaks David Beckham's record. He's done everything for this club, and I didn't really like the criticism he got in the early part of the season, because no, he wasn't at his best, but there were so many issues in that team, and James Ward-Prowse was trying to hold it together, and he's only human. But I think when Southampton need him in these crunch games, he's there. And without James Ward-Prowse, I'd hate to think where Southampton would have been in the last 2 to 3 years. They might just be in middling championship team right now, because he's saved so many points. He's always there. His celebration, I thought, was outstanding. The way he ran over to the away fans after when he scored, and yeah, was
there a little nod to the bench as well as he went past? There was.
I don't know, maybe, but it's been a difficult week for him. I'm sure he's always been the bridge between the management staff and the dressing room, especially with no Romeu there anymore. So he's the guy who puts things forward. And what's interesting is that this week as well, Rubén Sellés he's created this leadership group that Southampton didn't have. So I think he's got 3 or 4 leaders. I'm not sure who they are yet. I'm sure he'll elaborate on that as the week goes on. But as long as Ward-Prowse has the burden's taken off his shoulders a little bit, then it can't be a bad thing.
Let's talk about the defensive performance yesterday. Perfect time to get our second clean sheet of the season. I was worried when I saw that Salisu was injured, Glenn, but actually some standout performances yesterday, and not just those blocks.
Yeah, I was impressed with Maitland-Niles. I mean, that's his best position without a doubt. He seems to be, you ask him to play right back in a back four, that seems to simplify things for him. And I thought he had a really good game. He's not perfect. He dozes off occasionally. He let Chilwell get behind him a couple of times, but I thought he had a good game. Bella-Kotchap coming back was huge because he adds the pace and it was especially needed without Salisu being there. I think we can safely assume that Salisu and Bella-Kotchap would have been the two centre backs if Salisu had been fit. But Bednarek had a decent game. I liked in the first half in particular, he was very, very aggressive with his closing down of Fofana, who was their sort of main forward player. And I thought he did a good job there. As Steve said, he did the basics well in the second half, just heading balls away and stuff like that. Bednarek is for me, he's passable in a back four for the simple reason that he has to take responsibility. There's nowhere to hide. When there's just two centre halves, you can't be looking at someone 3 yards to your right or 3 yards to your left to do the job for you. You've got to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be your fault. And he always seems to have his better games in a back four. Will he play next week? I don't think he will if Salisu is fit. But he did a good job. And Perot obviously had the standout moment with clearing that ball off the line.
Celebrating like he'd won the World Cup.
Yeah, okay, yeah, a bit over the top, but why not?
Love it.
But the other thing is, it's obviously not just the back four. It's I thought Romeo Lavia was great in midfield again. Bearing in mind you've got £105 million player he's playing against there, and that Mateo Kovacic, who I always thought is a good player. And there was one bit where Lavia just kind of bodied him out of the way, and it's just like, this is ridiculous for a 19-year-old kid to do that. And again, he was, he's wasting time as he got substituted, and generally,
good to see, isn't it?
Yeah, all the dark arts, housery, great stuff. And I thought he had another superb game. So as a defensive unit, as you said, Elianusi and Armstrong, they did their tracking back well, and just made it difficult. And Chelsea just didn't. If I was talking about Chelsea, I'd be absolutely raging at the lack of sort of team pattern. Similar to what we've had, to be honest, this season under Jones and even under Ralph. There didn't seem to be any sort of pattern of play as to how to progress to the final third of the field and get shots on target. And as Steve said in the second half, you can put as many crosses in the box as you like if you haven't got anyone in there to head them. And so happy day. So a good defensive performance, decent for Bazunu to get a clean sheet as well, can only help him. And he looks solid. Sometimes even if he doesn't let in goals, he looks a bit shaky. But I thought he was decent yesterday.
So is that going to be the key to staying up now, Steve? Playing a left-footed left back at left back and a right-footed right back at right back and a back four. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but
it's a novel concept, isn't it?
Yeah, seemed to work yesterday.
Yes. It's again though. It's one of those you've got. It's horses for courses, and the way that Chelsea play does hugely lend itself to playing a flat back four. Because you can just be able to see exactly what's in front of you. They don't have the people that are running the channels in that system, so you don't have any real advantage from playing an extra centre back. You basically, if you do that against Chelsea, you sacrifice the midfield completely. Whereas we had a fair degree of control of the midfield, I thought, for most of the game, really. Fernandes and Kovacic were decent in patches, but we kind of always had four there, really, in the centre because of the narrow system. Not only did you have Lavia and Ward-Prowse, but you had Elianusi and Armstrong tucking in for the most part as well. So we just crowded them out. And going forward, that system might not work against certain other teams.
Yeah, I think in home games we'll need a little bit more than what that system, where we're expected to have the ball and do a little bit more with it. I think we need a bit more than what that system and those players offer.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, let's also remember that since middle of November, we've still only scored one Premier League goal from open play. Another set piece goal. So while we've created a little bit more yesterday against a good side, I think we still need to have something that's good, that's going to just generate a few more chances, because we know that at the moment our conversion rate is low. So if your conversion rate is low, you've got to create more to give yourself that opportunity. And I mean, Leeds' defence should present us with that opportunity, but it's up to us to come up with a system that's going to take advantage of that.
Well, just before we get on to that Leeds game, Jacob, there's a few questions tonight about coming in on the chat about players that weren't in the squad yesterday. I know you touched on Rubén Sellés setting out his stall pretty early on in the week. The names that are going to come up time and time again, I guess, are Orsic and Sellés, who weren't in the match day squad yesterday. Does that tell us more about them than we thought? Because I know last week we were talking about it might have been that they'd fallen out with Nathan Jones, and it was going to be quite telling if they were straight into the starting 11 yesterday, and clearly they weren't. So perhaps the problems, whatever they may be, are shared by different coaches.
Yeah, maybe. I think Sellés is quite an honest and direct speaker. He's obviously got that experience playing at the international level. There might have been an issue a week or a couple of weeks ago. But the important thing is that Rubén Sellés or even Nathan Jones, to some extent, sees these players every day. He sees how aggressive they are. I know that's how.
There's a word we weren't expecting to use for a while.
Who's called it, but this is what Sellés exactly. I know, but Sellés, I think, has been good, but I think he's probably better in a low block or a mid to low block. I think if you look at the data, which Sellés I'm sure does, he's not the most aggressive. There are issues, or there are concerns over his 1v1 defending, and if Southampton are going to go high, I put a picture on Twitter yesterday about how high Bella-Kotchap was in the half. He was the deepest Southampton player, but he was still well inside Chelsea's half, and Sellés probably hasn't got the pace or the 1v1 ability to do that. I'm surprised he wasn't on the bench, but then Lianco probably gives you that option to play it right back. He can play on the outside centre back if he wants to go to a back three, so he gives a little bit more. Orsic, he's a little bit off the pace, and what Sellés said yesterday is that he wants his team to transition fast. So whenever they won the ball from deep, they transition fast. And Orsic is in the quickest. He's a little bit like Jadon Sancho in a way, in terms of if he's a winger, he wants to combine out wide with players around him. But in order to do that, I think I touched on this a few weeks ago, in order to do that, Southampton need to have sustained possession, need to have 50, 55, 60% in Chelsea's half or the opposition's half. And right now, Southampton have got that. So, and I have concerns of whether he's a number 10 as well, if you want to play that system. So, yeah, there might be issues off the pitch, but Sellés went for players that he trusts and for players that know their jobs. And I think there's too many concerns from both of them at the moment to put them back in.
And if we're winning games, of course, it's all largely irrelevant anyway. Leeds next at the weekend, a real chance to climb off the bottom of the table, which, Glenn, that would be just huge psychologically, if nothing else, just to get off the bottom of the table at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. The way I've been looking at it for the last few weeks is that until we can string together a run of 2 or 3 games, the league table's irrelevant anyway. And we've had this win against Chelsea, which is a bonus, because you don't ever put 3 points down on your predictor when you're playing Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. This Leeds game, however, it is the proverbial 6-pointer. We've blown a number of games that we should have got points in when Nathan Jones was in charge. So if we can go there and win that one, then I will believe we have a serious chance of staying up. And getting off the bottom of the table obviously feeds into that. Leeds, in my opinion, are certainly one of the teams who you're looking at to finish below us. I can only really see Leeds and Bournemouth at the moment, and then you're hoping that you can get above an Everton or
is it 8 points separating the bottom 9? I think after
Yeah.
the results today. So
yeah, there's. I mean, and you're always looking for one to drop right into it. Now, I'd look at Crystal Palace myself as a team that are currently about 12th, who may well drop into it. And I know their fans are quite worried because they apparently have got not a great run of fixtures coming up. So I think we have to go into this Leeds game as you know. I mean, we have to target every game now because of where we are, but this is certainly one that we've got to look to try and win. They're not great. Steve's already sort of alluded to their defence not being the best. Their goalkeeper he made a horrendous mistake at the weekend, and he's definitely got a ricket in him. Meslier, is it? Yep. Losing to Everton would have put a bit of a downer on them. They've got the temporary manager in charge at the moment, the same as we have. So, it's one that we've got to target and at least make sure we don't get beat. But I think we need to really go for the win in this game. Leeds have got some good players in the sort of like the front half of the pitch. They're sort of line of number 10s, and Team USA in the middle of the park are half decent. Bamford doesn't seem to have got back to his best after his big injury, but certainly a team that we can get at. But we have to turn up, and this is this sort of game is what is going to make or break our season. The situation we're in now, we can't afford to go up there and get beat.
Well, Steve, the momentum is certainly going to be with us. Is it a case of we've had a few false starts so far this season, but is it a case of lose this and it's back to square one, or are you pretty confident about the weekend?
I mean, both. I'm fairly confident based on what I've seen from us this week and from what I've seen from Leeds in kind of the last 6 weeks, really. They've got a lot of energy, and yet they don't seem to really ever expend it in the right areas. And then they seem surprised when they're kind of exhausted by the end of the game and getting picked off. And but in terms of the overall situation, I mean, most of the other results couldn't have possibly gone an awful lot worse for us, really, with Bournemouth winning, Everton winning, and it just wasn't ideal, given that, I mean, we weren't expecting anything from that game. So Christ, if we'd lost yesterday, we'd be basically done. We'd be 5 points adrift, and at that point you're just thinking, well, there's no hope. Whereas all of a sudden we go and get this good win where we look organised, we look like we've actually got a tactical plan, with alterations that work based on sort of how the sort of flow of the game changes as it's going on. So yeah, maybe we might be all right, but it's as you say, these games are the big ones. It's I mean, fairly ridiculous that a third of our points this season have come against Chelsea.
That's a great stat.
it's mental, isn't it? But ultimately, it's the ones against the teams around you, because if you're losing to those sort of sides, then they're pulling away from you. Draws, you can kind of take it or leave it, I think, in sort of certainly early in the season. But once you get down to the business end of it, it's wins have got to be the currency. And yeah, I mean, I think we've got the tools to go and win up there. It's a case of whether we can string two good performances back to back, and how we deal with the Ellen Road crowd, because I mean they'll be sort of behind their team from the start, and it'll be loud, and it'll be sort of harem scarum, at least sort of from kickoff. And you've just got to do what you can to quieten them down and sort of wrestle control of the game ourselves. And hopefully we've got a plan in place that's going to let us do that.
Start like we did against Wolves, start like we did against Chelsea, and see. Jacob, as Steve says, the 3 points are going to be key here. The results didn't go our way at the weekend. We said last week, I think this was a good time to be playing Chelsea. It's got to be a great time to be playing Leeds, isn't it? There aren't many clubs. In fact, they're probably the only club that are currently in a worse position than we are in the league. So we've got to go there with our tails up.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think the atmosphere is just going to be just so on a knife edge, isn't it? Because Leeds are going to try and start fast. They're going to be in your face, typical Ellen Road. But I think Southampton really have to go there and stamp their authority like they did it yesterday, because it settles the nerves down, not only with supporters, but with themselves as well. It gives them confidence, because Southampton start well, first 5-10 minutes, they start playing out from the back. They start looking a little bit more relaxed and fluid, and looking just more likely that they can sustain in the longer the game goes on. I think Leeds are one of those teams that I do expect them to go on a little run soon, purely because of the Ellen Road support. But it's going to be one of those games that I'm going to be extremely nervous for. I haven't felt as tense as I did yesterday. I know Steve alluded to the fact that during the 12 minutes, there wasn't many chances, but in there, I've just become quite numb recently. Not because I'm just trying to be a journalist, but it's just like
a bit cold.
Cold. I've taken all emotion out of it. Where I think it was towards the end where Sekumara almost got in and Southampton won a corner. It was showing a match a day, and I was almost shouting, "Come on!" And I had a few looks around me, but yeah, I just hope that it's not quite as nervous next week, and Southampton can just go there, be calm, but really impose themselves on the game as well.
We don't want any arguments or fisticuffs in the press box, because we know who's responsible if there is. Glenn, just quickly on their manager, I'm not entirely sure what the latest is. Does it make a difference if they appoint a new manager by the weekend? I don't think it looks like anybody's going to be coming in there. There's a few people that have turned it down.
It doesn't look like it, does it? I mean, they've been looking for a couple of weeks longer than we have, haven't they?
Yeah.
And since Jesse Marsh left, so they've got I can't remember his first name, Skubala, isn't it, as their caretaker manager? Whether he's someone who really is just holding the baby until they get someone else in. But the longer it goes on, you kind of think managers aren't going to want to join, and that's the situation I feel that we're in. I don't think anyone who's a potential long-term choice as a manager is going to be in a rush to join a team at the bottom of the league with 15 games to go. So I think they're kind of in a similar situation with us, and I think probably, unless there's something I don't know about that Jake is going to tell me in a minute, I feel that both clubs are probably going to end up, going with the manager that they've got in place at the moment for the rest of the season. So I don't see the triumphant return of Bielsa to Leeds or anything like that. I mean, funnily enough, that would give them a big lift, especially the crowd. But I don't really see that happening, to be honest.
Okay. Before we get on to managers and who may or may not be coming in and what we may or may not do, I'm going to trouble you all for a score prediction for the Leeds game. If you're watching live, get on the comments and let us know how you think this one's going to turn out at the weekend. Steve, I'm going to come to you first for a score prediction, please.
Oh, God. I kind of feel confident, which is terrifying. 3-1?
3-1 to us.
Why not?
Gosh, right.
Why not?
Okay.
All in.
Glenn, do you share the optimism?
Yeah, slightly more guarded than that, but I'll go for a repeat of what we had yesterday. I'll go for a 1-0 win.
1-0's fine, isn't it? And Mr. Optimism himself, Jacob?
I've doubted Southampton the last 2 weeks. I don't think Southampton are going to keep a clean sheet, second week running. So I'll go back to my usual trusted scoreline of a 2-1 win.
2-1 win. All right, I think same as Glenn, I'm gonna go with a 1-0 for that. So stick your predictions in the comments, because we do like reading those afterwards, and I know all the away fans like reading them as well. Let's get on to the managerial merry-go-round, as it were, and the latest news. So Jacob, on Tuesday, Jesse Marsh was all set to be appointed Saints boss. By Wednesday lunchtime, it was all off again. So in a nutshell, what went wrong?
Well, where to start? So the first meeting was on Monday. Everything seemed okay. Obviously, the issue was the contract, but Jesse Marsh was looking. He thought, okay, if there's potential contingencies, no problem at all. It looks like it'll be resolved the next day. So they're meeting on Tuesday morning, or their discussions, and there was a breakthrough. It all been agreed in principle. I think Jesse Marsh would be confirmed on Wednesday morning, Wednesday lunchtime. And then, but he said he travelled down to Southampton, as you know, in the Harbour Hotel. I think he was told to stay in his room, but Jesse Marsh, being an affable, popular guy, he thought, you know what, I'm going to get some food in the restaurant. But before we agreed the deal, he thought he'd sleep on it just to make sure, because everything had happened so quickly. and he slept on it, and he woke up the next day, was supposed to go to Staplewood to basically agree everything, sign the deal, hold the shirt up. And I think he just looked at the task at hand, saw the issues. He's got a reputation to keep intact. It had been damaged greatly, and I think it hurt him at Leeds. He liked the project at Southampton, but something didn't appeal to him, and he didn't think that he could keep Southampton up. Plus, it was only going to be a 6-month initial, so there wasn't many upsides for him. There wasn't really great backing, but I think it's something that could be revisited in the summer or later down the line. But I think both parties, it was quite raw, the Leeds sacking. It was only 9 days afterwards. It just came at the wrong time, really. And I think Southampton obviously pushed for Jesse Marsh. He had a huge dossier on him. They really liked him, but they really liked Rubén Sellés, and it was very tight between those two at the start of the week. So I think although they wanted Jesse Marsh, it wasn't the end of the world that they had to take Rubén to manage the Chelsea game.
So we don't get the headlines.
So he bottled it.
there is your headline. Yeah. So we don't get the story of Jesse Marsh leading the team to Leeds. Glenn, do we think we the answer was there all along? Does Rubén Sellés get the job until the end of the season for you?
I mean, it's very easy to go, yeah, we beat Chelsea, give him the job. It's more than that. I mean, I actually did that on Twitter yesterday, but there's more to it. There's more to it than that. It was the way he conducted himself during the week, and the press interviews on Friday were very impressive. We've obviously gone up there. We've won the game. You've seen how much the players sort of respect what he's done. He spoke very well after the game on Saturday, made it about the players and not about him, which is nice. The more I think about it, the more I think that what you ideally want to do, you don't want to employ a manager for the short term. You want to employ a manager who's going to be for 2.5, 3.5 seasons or whatever. And the position we are in the league, I can't see anyone who's a decent long-term bet wanting to join a club at this stage. I mean, not that I'm suggesting him for a second, but if you take a recently sacked manager like Frank Lampard, for example, he's seen as a failure at Chelsea, a failure at Everton. Is he going to want to put himself in a situation where he manages a team for 15 games that ends up getting relegated? I just don't, from the list that was being bandied about, I just don't see anyone who's going to be A, willing to take the job, and B, any better than Rubén Sellés anyway. And the additional thing with Sellés is that because he's come out and said, I want the job, if he's highly rated, you run the risk of him walking if they go and appoint someone else. So there's lots of things in play here. But I mean, yeah, we've won the game at Chelsea playing a certain way. Our home record this year is diabolical. If he can get some sort of tune out of us at St Mary's, then I really don't see the harm in giving him the job to the end of the season.
Just on that question, Jacob, I don't know if it was yourself that asked about whether he wanted the job or not. Were you surprised at his honesty? Because we've all been there. We've all watched those press conferences. We've all heard the caretaker manager go, well, I've been asked to prepare the team for the weekend and we'll see what happens and we'll go from there and it's out of my hands. But for him to actually come out and go, yeah, actually, I want the job. And I feel like I've been working up to this for the last 4 years. That, to me, that was really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, excuse a plug, but I've literally a piece has just gone out on The Athletic about that. So you can read it after this once you listen to this, obviously. But what Sellés has always said is that he's ready to become the manager. Even in the summer, before everyone really knew of him, friends of his, people who had worked with him, as always says, his goal was to not coach but manage a top 4 club one day. And he's obviously prepared to take the team onto the end of the season. But there's something about being a caretaker that rankles with him. He doesn't want to be called a caretaker. So if he does get the job, it'll be called interim, because caretaker feels temporary. He wants to prove himself that he's going to get a longer term contract. He wants to be the manager. Everything about him, the way he's spoken to players, he didn't speak to players saying, right, I'm only here till Chelsea, or this is a short term fix. It was with months in mind, really. So, yeah, Sellés is, the way he conducted himself in press conferences, shook hands with every journalist, the cameramen, the way he dressed. He didn't look like a guy that wanted to be a caretaker. I think he's extremely impressive the way he talks. I've tried to find people that don't like him or people that have got a few words to say about him. Just
What
for
the journalist?
just for balance, really. Like, surely people don't like him this much. But honestly, I can't find anyone. From coaches in the first team, in the academy, to players, to agents, they all speak really highly of him, and it's fantastic. And I just can't find anyone.
I did wonder whether he'd had that jumper yesterday and that suit ready to go for like the last 4 years, because when he stepped out on the pitch yesterday with his coffee in his hand, he certainly looked the part. Steve, just final say on this: they can't bring anybody else in now. I mean, by the time people get around to listening to this podcast, he may well have been confirmed as manager to the end of the season. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Whichever way you look at it.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? The problem you have is that historically, caretaker managers do not do well when they are given the gig on a permanent basis. So you are always kind of fighting the sort of tide of history in this sort of scenario. So and I'm sure, I mean, as much as we've kind of discussed the sort of pros and cons of Rasmus Ankerson's strategies and algorithms and all this sort of stuff, I'm sure that will be in their mind. It'll be, okay, let's see how this goes. Let's not overreact one way or the other based on one result and one performance. See how we go. Maybe give it a couple of weeks. Now that we've obviously won yesterday and given ourselves half a chance, then that gives, I mean, despite obviously the other results not going our way, it at least gives you a little bit of breathing room that you're not completely cut adrift and having to make a rush judgment. We can afford to kind of let this play out for maybe another 2 or 3 weeks. If the players look like the performances are staying at a good level, then yeah, fine. Confirm him till the end of the season, and that's kind of us making the judgment, and we go from there. We've taken kind of used the evidence in front of us, and that's great. I think if we gave him the job solely on the strength of yesterday, I think that's a risk. Just because, I mean, as I say, the fate of caretaker managers when they go permanent is not good, and you only have to look down the road through the New Forest to see how well their caretaker manager's gone. Although obviously he managed to burgle a win yesterday at Molineux. But yeah, Bournemouth have been terrible since Gary O'Neill got the basically since we went down there and won, I think, wasn't it? That basically they've been kind of what we expected them to be after that little sort of rallying period when Parker left. And you kind of wonder whether that set of results might actually just have been relief that they didn't have Scott Parker barking at them anymore. But yeah, I think with Sellés, I mean, as you say, he speaks well. Clearly, people rate him, both sort of externally within the game and internally within the club. So he's already kind of got one foot in the door, really. Yesterday will have done him the world of good. Even if it's only just self-confidence of saying, yeah, I can do this. This has gone well. But having engineered that result, he then also automatically gets the backing of the players. Because they put a system together that the players are comfortable with, they're confident with, and they've earned the result against one of the most expensively assembled teams in Premier League history. So yeah, I mean, as I say, let's give it a couple of weeks, see how the Leeds and Leicester games go. I mean, I think if we get 4 points from those two games, I think that would be enough to say, right, that's a slam dunk for the season, and let's just get this done and get this nailed, and we've got a bit of momentum, and we can build from there. If next week doesn't go to plan, then obviously there might be a little bit more head scratching going on.
Well, if it was a job interview this weekend, this last couple of days, it hasn't gone too badly for him. So we shall see. All eyes on any potential announcements this week. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening this week. Don't forget you can follow Total Saints Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Have a search for @TotalSaintsPod. That's where you'll find us there. The website is totalsaints.co.uk. There's a link on there to the online shop as well. And of course, we're on Patreon. That's where you can support the podcast with a monthly contribution. It's Patreon/Total Saints Podcast, patreon.com. Got 4 different tiers on there, ranging from £5 to £20 a month. Each of the tiers comes with its own perks, including some weekly shouts for those patrons in our top 2 tiers, the Franny Benali tier and the Mick Shannon tier. So thanks as always to Dave Melton, Mark Atkins and Matt Hall, and also to Colt Baker, Dave Ernsberger, Ed Busy, Nick Higston, Phil Cook, Matt Rose and Nick Reed in our Mick Shannon tier. Thank you, Steve. Cheers, Glenn. Thanks, Jacob. Have a great week and we'll catch you again soon.